The repeats in history are stark, but it's gonna happen like a flash mob. But it's gonna happen so unbelievably quick, and it's gonna catch everybody off guard. Within the next 4 months, I would say no later than March. Which, by the way, wild card, we're going to be entering into that second magnetic field in earnest all the way through 2024 in March of 2022.
It's being reported that the top 5 tech corporations are lobbying hard against consumer privacy. These corporations include Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Google. Amazon has also successfully lobbied against 36 privacy protection bills across 25 states. I do everything in my power to ensure my privacy online, which means I use a VPN. That also means you'll prevent advertisers and corporations from creating profiles on you. You can head over to virtualshield.com, and in the download tab, I'm going to choose Firefox. And click Install Now to add the Virtual Shield add-on. It's just that easy. And get started with your free 30-day trial. Install it, click Connect. You'll see the shield turn from red to green. And you'll see how from my initial service provider, I was able to even change my IP. Virtual Shield Network protected. I partner with Virtual Shield to give the Adapt 2030 audience a 50% off for life and a free 30-day trial of Virtual Shield during the holidays. Go to virtualshield.com/adapt2030 or click the link in the description box below to start protecting yourself online now.
Welcome, everyone. This is David Morgan of themorganreport.com, and today I have David DuByne from Adapt 2030. David, it's been a while since we got to communicate one-on-one for the public's benefit. And I remember, I think in the first interview that we did or discussion, it's a conversation between us. We're talking about food before it really was that well known that we're having all of these crises. And I talked about a lot of the work that you've done on your website, Adapt 2030, with, locusts, weather problems, the coming ice age, inability to get materials like, oil supplies, really. I mean, a lot of the fertilizer are oil-based. So all kinds of different synergistic things that touch each other that are required to get that food production at a level that it has been sustained. And so now it's degrading, it's supply chains, it's all these things. But the one big takeaway, which pretty much stunned me, was when we went over that, we talked about what has happened in the past. And of course, the history rhymes, it doesn't repeat exactly, was the amount of cost for food. And I think it was somewhere around 400%. So if you're looking at someone not in the Western world where we're paying maybe 5% of our income to buy food, if it goes quadruple, that's 20-25%. But someone in Indonesia or the Asian countries or less developed economies, I mean, you're talking what the Bible says. It's a day's wages for some barley kind of thing. Can we go over that again? Because it really stunned me, and I don't think people really heard it the first time.
I will, and I thank you for bringing me on again. A few things happening through the news in the last couple of weeks are setting up 2022 in the very beginning quarter of January, February, March to be something that's going to be society rifting and shaking to the point where it really is going to start to test and tear the threads of our current civilization that we understand. So if we go back a couple weeks, CF Industries CEO came out and said, this is it. Ammonia prices have risen 13x. Natural gas is not where it should be in terms of volumes in certain areas where they do produce fertilizer, the EU specifically. Pipelines here in America shutting down, and just a lot of logistics of getting that base, whatever it is, into a factory to produce these what we consider industrial fertilizers, NPK fertilizers that are used on large agribusiness, 10,000 acre farms. The amount of fertilizer is not going to be there next year for the world. So he was saying get ready for yield reductions per acre on how many bushels or tons are coming out due to the lack of available fertilizers. They're looking somewhere around 10 to 12% reduction in global availability next year. And you have to wonder how that 10 or 12% reduction in fields will then push down on the bushels coming out of, whether it's soybeans, corn, whatever it is. Now, so that's one factor in itself. And looking back through history, the average, just the average of these price spikes, they seem to have occurred about every 5 years during these grand solar minimums, is a 4x. Now, there was an extreme example in Amsterdam, Rotterdam, where else was it? Brussels, and areas in that specific region of what is now Austria, Germany, going over into the Netherlands. Around 1640, 1650, it spiked 7x. But otherwise, when you look through just a trend of a regular grand solar minimum, about 4x is where you go. And you have to think about, with energy prices rising and food prices rising, and you get to everything's exponentially increasing, at what point does the average person not have the ability to pay for that? And then again, all we do is we're just flipping the pages of history going, oh, that looks exactly the same. Gee, when did they go to the streets? How did they topple the government? What kind of institutional changes were put forth after that? How did the economy shift? How did it change? So we are looking at things that are rhyming, but now to put a timeline on it, the biggest thing for me just yesterday was Safeway is now putting collapsible gates into their supermarkets so you can't run out with carts full of groceries to prevent flash mobbing. But again, that's a great excuse. Flash mobs are hitting the Hermes stores, the Gucci, the Prada store was hit. Now the supermarkets are saying, well, we need to do that too, because look, they hit a $5,000 handbag. You know they're going to go for that can of tuna next. I mean, it's baked in there. You know this was the plan to control access to food. Then they're going to put troops there, and then that's where we're going by Q1 of 2022. In my opinion, I just see things unfolding kind of like you do. I'm just putting my little twist on it, a little bit of cinnamon. It is the Christmas season.
Well, let me go over part of that again, because I heard it and we've had a bit of an off film conversation. So this idea that we're putting these gates in at Safeway so that the mobs can't run out with the can of tuna, but the real reason is that they want to control everything in and out. Isn't that what you're suggesting?
You said it. We both agree on it. That's, and how has it been set up so far where you need the passes to go in? Okay, if you got the green check right now or the green QR code, that is going to change in just a couple more months or even less. They're going to redefine what fully vaccinated entails, where you'll have to have yet a third or a fourth to continue to keep that code green. Then what? So you can kind of see how everything's being set up for the control of food itself. Now, how long do you think it'll be like the grain shipments being robbed in England, in the Wolf and the Mono Minimum both, before it starts to happen here where they'll hit the trucks on the road that are full? We saw the same things in Venezuela. They would stop a chicken truck with 5,000 chickens on it, and 200 people would run out, ripping cages off, and chickens flying everywhere, and just like completely strip that truck in 5 minutes on the highway. So how far of a stretch is that, or how long in the time duration before that starts happening here? And then, how will the governments control it? Of course, troops, access. You probably have to prepay before you go into some places, show proof of funds now. It wouldn't surprise me. Nothing would surprise me any longer.
Great. Another one that really popped in, and this was not, pre-done, and that was, the oil crisis, peak oil, and there's so many people that, that's a big myth, and that, with fracking, which is a story I won't go into now. I'm not, the fracking thing is not all it's cracked up to be, pun intended. But in one of the oil documentaries, which I've probably watched 3 times, one of the ones that just sunk to the pit of my stomach was it takes 10 calories of energy to produce 1 calorie of food. So I think if we go at the big picture, and I know how good a thinker you are, because I watch almost all of your work, David, it's all energy based, really. So if oil prices are going higher, that means transportation costs are up. It means everything related to food is going up. So you might be fairly well off now, where 10% of your food budget or 10% of your total budget is food. Maybe it goes double, but your utility bill doubled and your automobile costs doubled and everything else doubled. So it's kind of a big picture, can you kind of walk us through your thinking on how this could affect not only the food supply, but further perhaps breakdowns and civil unrest?
Well, one thing I wanted to throw in on top of the list you just mentioned is if you had seen the life insurance providers this year paid out the most in death claims that they ever have. So you can also anticipate healthcare and also life insurance premiums going up because of the mass amount of payoffs. Now, at what point do they roll and say, wait a minute, too many people are dying too quickly, we just can't pay off all this? So where does that money go once it leaves the hands of somebody into the will, into the family? Okay, they got a pile of money for a minute, and then what happens? But if you look back in history, the reason people left and moved to different areas, a fingerprint of a grand solar minimum would be population reduction, population migration, economic collapse, and then a restructuring of government. So you can see already, whoever knew this cycle was front running it enough to lock the planet this time, where people couldn't move in mass like they have the last, I've studied the last 6 of these events pretty well, back to say 2,400 years ago in the Homeric minimum, something like this moving forward. And what happens is these people move when they can't either grow the food, have access to the food, have a job to pay for food, or just things become so dire and so unworkable and unlivable that they would literally pack up oxen carts or get on ships or leave the way you could in the 1600s, 1350s, 800 AD, 2,000 years ago, literally at the 0 mark, birth of Christ year. I mean, where do you go? Well, if you could prevent that from this time, you would absolutely stave off a lot of things, because once those people moved, there was a secondary knock-on effect where you had masses and masses of people arriving in new areas that overwhelmed the systems that were functional and in place there. And then the amount of crime would increase because the people arriving didn't have jobs, and it was instantly there was food there and they were grabbing it. And there's a lot of things went in a different direction. Even though they were in safety, it was a struggle to stay in safety because people there that were at the level to still subsist and have a decent life. Now you got double the amount of population moving in less than a year, and things just went topsy-turvy. And then the locals were getting very angry of all these people coming in with their ox carts or by ship, or things getting overwhelmed and overladen of just a huge tidal wave of migration. And where does it go? When people can't afford what they need to live, what do people resort to? I mean, yeah, using sound money, gold and silver, but if you don't have that, most people, I think, would resort to stealing to stay alive, feeding your kids. That's another thing, these parents that are going to try to keep their children alive are not going to obey the rule of law in any way, shape, or form. The way they're looking at it is, you, my friend, are standing in the way of my children eating. That's where it's going to come down to in the beginning of it. So repeats in history are stark, but it's going to happen like a flash mob. But it's going to happen so unbelievably quick, and it's going to catch everybody off guard. Within the next 4 months, I would say no later than March, which, by the way, wild card, we're going to be entering into that second magnetic field in earnest all the way through 2024 in March of 2022.
Well, let's talk about that. The magnetic field, we're in an electric universe. I'm convinced we're electrical beings. I'm convinced of that. So now when we get, let's say, a higher or lower vibrational level, I think it's higher, listening to previous videos. How could that, or what's your, I'll call it hypothesis, if I may, you can correct me, on what that energetic field that we're going to be going through could do possibly to humanity?
Well, humanity in the physiological level and the spiritual level is one subset, and then we have the atmosphere and the way it's going to bend, which is another subset, and then we have the crust of the planet going to act and behave in a certain way as well. So you have all these variables overlaying on top of each other, in addition to what's going on with the economy, the food price increases, and people are going to really have to get together to start growing more food locally. So if you allow me to dissect that for a second, right now Jupiter is right where it's coming into these 4 gas giants lining up in a square in October of 2024. Now, any of you who have solar system scope or some sort of JPL software, Universal Sandbox, you can go into these modelings of where the planets will be at what time. They have an orbit that can be calculated, so just spin it out to October of 2024, and you'll see a really unique square formation that is out there. Well, Earth will be in the center of that, coming as sort of a parallel with the sun and a second magnetic field out there with the Earth in the center, and a toroid looping magnetic field. Energies are increasing because we, have stepped into Aquarius, and the astrology just literally mapped the frequency of the field we're moving through, and then astronomy explains where the planets sit as they transverse around through these different energetic fields. Different way to think about it. You can name it, I don't know, a scientific name, or you could give it a name like Aquarius or Taurus or Leo. Just different frequencies of energy and how fast something's going to vibrate, including the human residence, the Earth, the solar system, and it's all mapped out. It's been mapped out. That's why you have 12 zodiacs and like the precession of the equinoxes and all these things. They know exactly where the energies are flowing within that region of space that we're transiting with that different energetic frequency. So this one's a faster frequency. So everything's going to be moving faster, including our Earth crust is going to start rifting a little bit. We're going to see splits. And this is a wild card that I'm calling right here. Right around March of 2022, there's going to be more strangeness of disrupted infrastructure, rail lines splitting, bridges just coming undone from their banks, locks not being functional because they split or uplifted, fiber optic cables rifting, and just a whole bunch of things like pipeline breaks just from the Earth rifting. There'll be more of that in the first 2 to 3 weeks of March than there would be in the last 10 years. And it's an anomaly to take a look at that just verifies this second magnetic fields in play. And then how does the human deal with it? Because our magnetosphere is weakening, the sun's heading into a grand solar minimum, our magnetic poles are in incredible amounts of what they call polar wander. They're jumping all over the place. Magnetic field stabilization is not there. Increasing cosmic rays, and then our brains, the way with the two hemispheres being magnetic also, with all that electromagnetism shifting downward, energy frequency upward, how's the human brain going to play into perception of all this? I'm firmly of the belief, and I might get a little woo-woo here, but the Great Reset is all about these elitists understanding the new frequency field changes. So they have to reset it, because what the old frequency was of the last 2,000 years, that doesn't match anymore. So a new system of top-down overseership of the planet needs to be. So then we got cryptocurrency, and we got the Great Reset, and the whole carbon credit scheme, and the personal carbon credit allocations, and the eco-valuation for a new base of asset for digitizing forests for a value, or the Earth itself for a value to create a new currency, all based on just changes that they see coming. The old system can't hold, fiat's going to go away. And David, we talked about fiat for a long time. But these shifts in the atmosphere in earnest when the jet stream's growing out of their flow, and the cloud cells are going to move into different positions because they're not locked in, decreasing magnetosphere, and a second magnetic field, which very few people have any idea what's going to happen. I hear a lot of, oh, it's so slight, it's only a tiny one. Okay, I understand it's a tiny one, but it's a second magnetic field not seen since 1486 or 79 AD is the best match for this one. So we got to go back 2,000 years in history to find the same planets where they sit in that square and where the Earth will reside in the middle of it. The last time it was at this intensity, 1 degree of arc difference, was 79 AD. I mean, something vast is about to occur here. And when you start to take a look at it, it's going to be a holistic spiritual side to change. It's going to be you and your mind being willing to change, and acceptance of change, and change being the state of waking being that you are, not stability, but change will be the new waking state. And if you see plasma dancing across the skies and electrified skies, that's going to throw things off. People are just not going to react the same. And the now, I'm calling 2023 the year of now, because at that point, there'll be no more future. Everything will be at this point of just staying alive, moving through changes, etc. in the now in 2023, because investing in the future for your retirement 401k, that will have zero, that won't even be on the radar any longer, 2023. But the impetus and the first push into it to really see where these changes are going to take us, all eyes on March 2022, and a whole bunch of people are talking about stock market collapse at that point too. So, I maybe threw out too much information there to kind of come back at, but that's the way I'm seeing it.
Well, a lot to unpack, and I don't want to, it happens to me.
I know. Get out 2 suitcases and lay it out.
Well, they give me, 4 questions, and I can't. By the time I got the third one answered, I can't remember the fourth one. But the first would be, how are you? I won't say so sure, but how have you dialed in on that date? You seem pretty confident of that March 2022. How can you be, that sure of the date?
The magnetic fields. Once we're in that, we're going to be in it. Now, it's going to be intensifying day upon day after that point. If you look at what happened the last time the Earth was coming around in the March-April date, swinging around and not even fully locked in the magnetic field, there was an enormous amount of volcanic eruptions and earthquakes at that same time last year. And you could see it. It was sort of what that crossover point. 2019, again, was a big year coming in around March and April. It seems that that's the point that our Earth really starts to hit and vibrate in that new field. But this year is going to be quite different, where we are truly encompassed in the entire field until we come to the very center of it. Now we're sort of on the periphery, out on the right, if you will, slowly marching in right to be directly in the center with all the gas giants in there. You got to realize these gas giants are unignited stars. Jupiter is, in my consideration, a brown dwarf along with so many others. It's an unignited star. And if you go back in the past, they talk about Saturn glowing in the skies, much larger than we see today, which means it is possible for electromagnetic activity to increase and excite atmospheres or turn on something into a higher glow mode inside there. But you see how large these planets outside in our solar system, there's a lot of magnetic pull. There's a lot of electromagnetism flowing through that square out there. They're going to start interlooping on themselves. And if you count from the outer planets in, and you're going Jupiter, Mars, and then Earth. So that field is going to be terminated at Jupiter, and then you have Mars and then Earth. So we're just 2 planets away from that second magnetic field. But if you look at the sun, we're the 3rd planet away. So as toroid looping fields are coming across our planet here, we're two planets away from the second field, 3 planets away from the main field. And how's that going to interact? Well, as we come into March, we're going to see, because that's the first time in earnest in the last 2,000 years we'll be locked in this pattern again.
Another thought I had, and it's maybe a digression, we can address it or not, we're having a discussion, but the Schumann resonance, I know some of the meditation work I've done, when I get to that, I think it's 7.8 hertz, I actually have a device that resonates at the Schumann resonance. It just seems very calming, grounded. I don't want to be too woo-woo on it. So give me any thoughts on, one, the Schumann resonance, where we are relative to that, where we're going relative to that, and when we do get that change, where we've been, for my personal experience, pretty happy at that frequency, and now we're forced to change it. What do you have to say?
Chapters of history would be the best guide, because as we go through the centuries and the millennia, is it even comparable on how humans had thought 2,000 years prior, or the systems of government or economy that surrounded that civilization at the time? And then it shifted with the same energies moving. So how will it be this time with 8 billion people out here? What happens if we lose the internet? We lose connectivity. At that point, the biggest, I wouldn't say fear, but the thing to think about is, how will people really react to it? And what if the sky does change tinge because the sun steps down in activity even further, and the spectral out in terms of light changes? Because if you go Roy G. Biv and you're taking a look at the red, orange, yellow, blue, indigo, violet, see John Casey in his first book on Cold Sun put a blue angstrom wavelength sun on the front cover. So you've seen the sun go from the yellow, which we knew as a kid, and before that orangish. So it's stepping down. Now maybe we're at this midpoint where the reason it's white now is that transitional phase between light output. Now how is this going to be absorbed by humanity if we see changes of everything we saw? It was so stable that it was the crux in the base rock and the bedrock of all belief of life itself, that your sky is blue. your sun is yellow, no, orange, no, I mean white now. Okay, it changed already. But the bedrock of what it is, things don't appear in the skies that are plasma and hang up there for 15 seconds glowing like dragons. Or the squatter man doesn't appear in the sky. That's not a normal thing. But these are very possible events that we're going to see moving forward in 2024. Now, far before that, food prices, I mean, how do you think people are going to react to everything at the point where it gets so costly that they can't afford life anymore? And then in addition, you're getting all these, I wouldn't say psychic changes, but it would be perceptions. I just think the illusion is going to dissolve in front of a lot of people, where it's going to be laid bare, where a lot of people can see truly the systems of manipulation and control upon them and the world itself. And it'll be almost as if you open a curtain and you're looking at out a window on a bright sunny day. It'll be that clear and that stark of a difference. And then how will people react to that? So it's the whole wild card is the human element here on how they are going to perceive and react to changes from politics to economy to availability to starvation, famine, population migration, and then all these things in terms of Earth changes and actual physical planetary changes. I know, again, a lot to unpack there. Too early for you. Double espresso there, David.